So usually I stick to talking about the intersection of MBTI type and personality disorders specifically, but the issue of autism is related in many ways. So I wanted to talk about the intersection of MBTI and autism as I see it for a while now. People have been arguing on social media for a while if autism is genetic or a result of damage from environmental neurotoxins, and I think it is both, not one or the other. From my observations, I think most, if not all, neurodivergent intuitive people are on the autism spectrum. The introverts much more obviously than the extroverts, but the extroverts included. And this form of autism found in neurodivergent intuitive people is genetically inherited. So specifically, I'm saying INFJ, ENFJ, INFP, ENFP, INTP, ENTP, INTJ, ENTJ as neurodivergent intuitive personalities are the ones that have genetically inherited autism, which is distinguished by sensory processing differences. The defining feature of autism, as I understand and experience it and observe it in myself and others, is so-called sensory processing disorder. So we could argue about whether it's a disorder or just a sensory processing difference. So the sensory processing disorder or difference is basically being oversensitive, like highly sensitive or hypersensitive, or it could be hyposensitive as in undersensitive to some sensory input. I think that's the most important part of the sensory processing difference, but in addition to that, there seems to be something going on with difference in processing speed as well, as in the neurodivergent intuitive personalities have a faster and or slower processing speed than neurotypical personalities. And NJ personalities seem to have a hyper fast information processing speed, while NP types seem to have a slower information processing speed, not in every sense, but in many senses, and especially relative to NJ types. So the neurodivergent intuitive personalities are born with these sensory processing differences in sensitivity and speed, and these differences present as the neurodivergent kind of genetically inherited autism. Then we have common sensor personalities that are neurotypical: ISFJ, ESFJ, ISFP, ESFP, ISTP, ESTP, ISTJ, ESTJ. The autism that's exploding in the common sensor neurotypical personalities is the environmentally induced kind from aluminum and all the other environmental neurotoxins that have been mentioned that can damage the myelin around the nerves, among other things, and can induce sensory processing sensitivities of hypersensitivity or hyposensitivity that end up being classified as autism. So when people argue about whether neurotoxins are a factor in autism or whether it's genetically inherited, I think it's both. And I distinguish it this way between neurodivergent, genetically inherited, and neurotypical, environmentally induced by neurotoxins. I think the environmentally induced factors can also exacerbate sensory processing issues neurodivergent people are already born with. Another thing I've noticed is people use autism to mask personality disorders. Like an overt narcissist, INTJ or ENTJ might say they have autism to explain their overt narcissist traits that seem to lack emotional sensitivity, their lack of affective empathy. I think the neurodivergent NTJ have both autism and overt narcissism. So even though they might sometimes try to mask one with the other, I think they almost always legitimately have both. The overt narcissism is determined by their NTJ personality cognitive function stack order of preference, which has heavy use of TE, extroverted thinking, predisposing them to addiction to narcissistic supply, and seems to be born lacking affective empathy. And their autism is determined by their sensory processing differences. Empaths often use autism to mask for borderline personality disorder, since borderline has more negative stigma, while we're going through a time period of pretty much celebrating autism in many ways, since it's linked with intuitive neurodiversity, which should be celebrated legitimately, since it also comes with a significant intelligence gap over neurotypicals and better odds of having high empathy than neurotypicals. I've made the argument that narcissism is more born than made by making many examples on my channel about cognitive functions of preference that, when used heavily, predispose certain types to addiction to narcissistic supply, like heavy TE, extroverted thinking, and TJ types, or heavy SI, introverted sensing, and SJ types, for examples. And empaths are born, not made as well. They are born with cognitive functions of preference, like heavy intuition and heavy feeling. Borderlines are empaths with severe emotional dysregulation and are made from being born highly sensitive and subjected to narcissistic abuse. So empaths don't need to mask being empaths with autism, and I refuse to take on the borderline label either, and encourage empaths not to take on the borderline label, since it was invented by narcissists to project badness on empaths. Empaths need to tell the world who they are now, and not let narcissists keep telling them who they are. Being an empath is not a personality disorder, it's only a difference in sensory processing. Being a narcissist is a difference in sensory processing and a personality disorder. Borderline is something narcissists use to distract away from the problem of narcissists in the world by paying more attention to how empaths act when they are subjected to narcissistic abuse. So borderline, if it is legitimate in any way, is a manifestation of reactive abuse from empaths being abused by common narcissists. But empaths should reclaim pride in being born empaths, rather than enabling narcissists to project badness on them with the borderline distinction. Neurotypical people that are common sensor narcissists, like Kanye West, for example, who I don't know his exact type yet, but he is obviously a common sensor narcissist, and he is now trying to mask trying to mask that narcissism with autism. So even the common sensor narcissists have caught on to how neurodivergent people with autism mask personality disorders with autism. And Kanye is following suit. And Kanye he's more narcissist than autistic, but he may have been subjected to the neurotoxins that induce autism in the neurotypical population. So that brings me to another point, which is the fact that autism includes a range of sensitivity levels, from super sensitive to super insensitive, and this can be physically and emotionally. This is why people that seem so totally different, specifically with regard to emotional sensitivity, can both have autism. So a lot of people have the misunderstanding that to have autism, you have to have low empathy or something akin to it, like an inability to read people emotionally. And this probably has a lot to do with lagging and lacking research on females with autism, but it's only true like in hyposensitive types. But hypersensitive types can read people emotionally very well. People might see autism as being related to empathy disorders, as in having flat affect and not having enough empathy for people, and that's only part of it. That's only one side of the spectrum. The other side is the hypersensitive to emotional nuances side. So empaths and narcissists and psychopaths can all have autism because all it is mainly a sensory processing difference. Empaths and neurodivergent psychopathic narcissists just go in totally opposite directions as far as the manifestations of these sensory processing differences go, while common narcissists can fall anywhere on the spectrum in between. And as for the neurodivergent people with autism, empaths like INFJ and ENFJ types would have hypersensitivity, while narcissists and psychopaths and overt narcissists like ENTJ would have hyposensitivity. The NP types like INTP, INFP, ENFP seem to have a mix of hyposensitive and hypersensitive, but can seem more hyposensitive in many ways. So autism covers all of those neurodivergent types in different ways, and all of those neurotypical types in different ways, and those ways are defined by the sensory processing differences most of all, the way I see it.